The gunshot split the evening air like a thunderclap, three sharp cracks that sent pigeons scattering from the hospital awning. Glass exploded inward. A body slammed against the pavement outside Mercy Ridge Hospital's emergency entrance, blood pooling beneath the streetlights. Staff froze. Security scattered. And one nurse, already dismissed, already forgotten, already walking toward the parking lot, turned back. What happened in the next 4 minutes would bring 500 Marines to a city that had never seen them before. What happened on those stairs would destroy careers, expose lies, and prove that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a loaded gun. It's a person with nothing left to lose. Before we climb those stairs together, hit that subscribe button and follow this story to the very end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey goes. Grace Holloway was 32 years old, bone-tired, and completely invisible. She pushed through the side exit of Mercy Ridge Hospital at 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday, her scrubs still damp from a 12-hour shift in the geriatric ward. The autumn wind cut through the parking lot, scattering leaves across cracked asphalt. She pulled her jacket tighter and kept her head down, the way she always did. Grace had learned years ago that being noticed at Mercy Ridge was rarely a good thing. The hospital sat on the edge of Crescent Falls, a mid-sized city that had seen better decades. Mercy Ridge itself was a sprawling concrete beast, 70 years old and patched together with budget cuts and broken promises. The night shift was understaffed, the day shift was overworked, and Grace, who had been a registered nurse for 9 years, was treated like a warm body filling a slot. She was halfway to her car when the first gunshot rang out. Grace stopped. The sound came from the front entrance, maybe 200 feet away. A second shot followed, then a third. She heard screaming, sharp, panicked voices cutting through the dusk. Her training kicked in before her fear did. She turned and ran back toward the building. The emergency entrance was chaos. People were scattering in every direction, visitors stumbling over each other, staff ducking behind concrete planters. Shattered glass glittered across the sidewalk. And there, just beyond the automatic doors, a man lay on his stomach, blood spreading dark and fast beneath him. Grace's breath caught. The man wore a tan uniform, Marine Corps. She could see the insignia even from 20 feet away. Security was nowhere. The guards who usually loitered near the entrance had vanished. Grace scanned the area. No paramedics, no emergency response, just panic and noise. She moved toward the Marine without thinking. "Stop!" A voice cut through the chaos. "Stay back!" Grace turned. A woman in civilian clothes, late 50s, gray hair pulled back severely, was striding toward her. Judith Crane, Assistant Director of Operations. Grace had seen her before, always flanked by administrators, always holding a clipboard like a weapon. Judith's face was tight with fury. "Do not touch that man. This is a security incident. We're waiting for police." Grace stared at her. "He's bleeding out." "I don't care." "You're not authorized." Judith stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. "You're night shift. Geriatrics. This is not your department, not your responsibility, and if you touch him without clearance, I will have you suspended. Do you understand me?" Grace looked past her. The Marine's hand was twitching. Blood was pooling faster now, spreading in a dark halo around his torso. She could see his chest rising and falling, shallow, irregular breaths. He had minutes, maybe less. "Where's the trauma team?" Grace asked. Judith's expression hardened. "En route. You need to step back. Now." "He'll be dead before they arrive." "That's not your decision to make." Grace felt something cold settle in her chest. She'd heard that tone before. It was the same tone she'd heard 6 months ago when she'd reported a medication error by a senior doctor and been told to stay in her lane. The same tone she'd heard when she'd suggested protocol changes and been dismissed as overly cautious. The same tone that had accompanied every performance review that praised her work ethic while denying her promotions. She looked at Judith Crane and understood, with perfect clarity, that this woman didn't care whether the Marine lived or died. She cared about liability, about procedures, about control. Grace knelt beside the Marine. "I'm warning you," Judith started. Grace ignored her. She pressed her hands against the wound high on his right shoulder, near the collarbone. Blood welled between her fingers. The Marine's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "I've got you," Grace said quietly. "Get away from him." Judith's voice was shrill now. "I'm calling hospital security. You're done here. You're finished." Grace didn't look up. She kept pressure on the wound, feeling the Marine's pulse beneath her palm, weak but steady. He was young, maybe 24, close-cropped hair, a fresh scar along his jawline. His name tape read Torres. "Torres," Grace said. "Stay with me." His lips moved. No sound came out. Behind her, Judith was shouting into a radio. "I need security at the main entrance. Now. I have a staff member refusing to comply with direct orders. Yes, I want her removed." Grace tuned her out. She assessed the wound quickly. Entry point high on the shoulder, no exit wound she could see. The bullet was still inside. He was losing blood fast, but the shot had missed the major arteries. If she could get him to a surgical team in the next 10 minutes, he had a chance. She glanced toward the hospital entrance. The automatic doors were still open, but no one was coming out. No trauma team. No paramedics. Just empty hallway and fluorescent lights. "Torres," she said again. "Can you hear me?" His eyes focused on her just for a second. He nodded, barely. "I'm going to move you. It's going to hurt." He nodded again. Grace slid her arms beneath him, one hand still pressed against the wound. She braced herself and lifted. Torres was solid muscle, easily 190. Her legs screamed in protest. She gritted her teeth and stood, staggering slightly under his weight. Judith appeared in front of her, face flushed with rage. "Put him down! Right now! I'm ordering you!" Grace walked past her, straight through the shattered glass entrance, into the hospital. The lobby was deserted. The reception desk sat empty, computer screens glowing softly. Grace could hear voices echoing from somewhere deeper in the building, confused, frightened voices. But no one was coming. The hospital had gone into lockdown mode. Everyone was hiding. She adjusted Torres on her back, shifting his weight to keep pressure on the wound. Blood soaked through her jacket, warm and sticky. She started toward the elevator bay. Behind her, Judith was screaming into her radio. "Lock down the main elevator. I want her stopped. She's transporting a patient without authorization. This is a code violation." Grace reached the elevators and jabbed the call button. Nothing happened. She hit it again. The display stayed dark. They'd killed the elevators. She turned and saw Judith standing 30 feet away, radio in hand, face triumphant. "You're done," Judith said. "Security is on their way. You'll be escorted out, and I'll personally ensure you never work in this state again." Grace looked at the elevator, then at the stairwell door to her left. A small placard read, "Emergency stairs, Ward 7, Level 12, 12 floors, 216 steps." She'd counted them once during a fire drill. Torres groaned against her back. His breathing was getting shallower. Grace pushed through the stairwell door. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows on concrete walls. The stairs stretched up in a zigzag pattern, gray and endless. Grace tightened her grip on Torres and started climbing. 1 step, 2 steps. Her thighs burned. Torres was dead weight against her, his blood running down her back in warm rivulets. She forced herself to breathe evenly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, combat breathing, the kind they'd taught her years ago, in another life. 10 steps, 20 steps. The stairwell door slammed open below her. "Stop!" Judith's voice echoed up the shaft. "I'm ordering you to stop!" Grace kept climbing. She didn't look back. At the first landing, her legs started to shake. Torres's weight was crushing. Every muscle in her body screamed for her to put him down, to rest, to quit. She shifted him slightly, redistributing the load, and kept going. Floor 2, floor 3. Behind her she could hear footsteps, heavy boots. Security was coming. Grace's vision started to tunnel. Sweat stung her eyes. Her lungs felt like they were full of glass. Torres's head lolled against her shoulder, his breathing barely a whisper now. "Stay with me," she gasped. "Don't you dare quit on me." Floor 4, floor 5. The footsteps were getting closer. She could hear radio chatter echoing up the stairwell. Male voices, terse and professional. They were gaining on her. Grace's knee buckled on the 6th floor landing. She caught herself against the railing, sucking in air, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. Torres was slipping. She adjusted her grip, pulled him higher, and forced herself forward. Floor 7, floor 8. Her legs were numb. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. Each step was an act of pure will. Lift, place, push. Lift, place, push. The world had narrowed to this. Concrete steps and the weight on her back and the sound of Torres's breathing, faint and irregular. "You're making this worse for yourself." Judith's voice, distant now but still sharp. "When they catch you, and they will, you'll face charges, criminal charges." Grace didn't answer. She didn't have the breath. Floor 9, floor 10. The security guards were right behind her now. She could hear them talking, coordinating. 2, maybe 3 of them. Young voices, uncertain. "Ma'am, you need to stop. We don't want to hurt you." Grace kept climbing. Her vision was graying out. She couldn't feel Torres's pulse anymore, couldn't tell if he was still breathing. She just climbed. Floor 11. Her foot slipped on the edge of a step. She lurched forward, catching herself with one hand, Torres's weight nearly toppling her backward. For a moment she teetered there, balanced on the edge of falling. Then she found her footing and pushed on. The 12th floor door was right in front of her, 10 steps away, 5 steps. She could hear the guards behind her, close enough to grab her. One of them was reaching out, his hand inches from her shoulder. Grace hit the door with her full weight. It burst open and she stumbled through into the 12th floor corridor. Ward 7, surgical wing. The hallway was bright and clean and completely empty. Grace took 3 more steps and her legs gave out. She went down hard, twisting at the last second to keep Torres from hitting the floor. They landed together, Grace on her back with Torres half on top of her. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The ceiling tiles swam above her, white and blurry. Somewhere far away she heard voices shouting, running footsteps. Hands were pulling Torres off her, rolling her onto her side. Someone was asking her questions she couldn't process. Grace closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was sitting against the wall. Someone had wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Medical staff were swarming around Torres, lifting him onto a gurney, shouting orders to each other. An IV line went in. Someone called for an OR prep. Grace watched them wheel him away through doors that swung shut with a soft hiss. She tried to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. A young nurse, someone Grace didn't recognize, knelt beside her with a bottle of water. "You need to sit," the nurse said gently. "You're in shock." Grace took the water with shaking hands. The bottle slipped through her fingers and clattered to the floor. She stared at her hands. They were covered in blood, dried and dark, crusted under her fingernails. Footsteps approached. Grace looked up. Judith Crane stood over her, flanked by 2 security guards. Her face was tight with barely controlled rage. "Grace Holloway," Judith said, her voice cold and formal. "You are hereby suspended pending a full investigation into your conduct tonight. You violated multiple hospital protocols, ignored direct orders from a superior, and endangered a patient through unauthorized transport." Grace said nothing. She didn't have the energy. "You will leave the premises immediately," Judith continued. "If you return for any reason before the investigation concludes, you will be arrested for trespassing. Your credentials are revoked effective immediately." She held out her hand. "Badge and ID." Grace reached for the lanyard around her neck. Her fingers fumbled with the clip. The young nurse beside her started to help, but Judith snapped, "Don't!" Grace got the lanyard off and handed it to Judith. Judith took it without a word and dropped it into her pocket. "Escort her out," she told the security guards. "Make sure she leaves the property." The guards helped Grace to her feet. She swayed, lightheaded, but managed to stay upright. They walked her to the elevator, working now, apparently, and rode down in silence. Through the lobby, out the front entrance. The parking lot was full of police cars now, lights flashing red and blue across the pavement. Crime scene tape blocked off the area where Torres had fallen. Uniformed officers were interviewing witnesses, taking photographs, collecting evidence. No one looked at Grace. The security guards walked her to her car, a 10-year-old Honda with a dented fender, and waited while she got in. She sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at nothing while they stood outside like sentries. Finally, they tapped on her window. Time to go. Grace started the engine and drove out of the parking lot. In her rear-view mirror, she could see Mercy Ridge Hospital receding into the darkness. All lit windows and concrete walls, indifferent and cold. She made it 2 blocks before she had to pull over. She put the car in park, rested her forehead against the steering wheel, and started to shake. Not crying, just shaking, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline crash. After a while, she drove home. Her apartment was small and dark and quiet. Grace peeled off her blood-stained clothes and stood under the shower until the hot water ran out. She watched red-brown water swirl down the drain, mixing with soap, and disappear. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on her couch with all the lights off, staring at her phone. No messages. No calls. Nothing. At dawn, she made coffee and turned on the news. The local station was covering the shooting at Mercy Ridge Hospital. A reporter stood outside the emergency entrance talking about gang violence and hospital security measures. They mentioned a wounded Marine, critical but stable condition. They didn't mention Grace. She turned off the TV and sat in silence, watching the sun come up through her apartment window. At 8 a.m., her phone finally rang. Unknown number. Grace answered. Hello? Is this Grace Holloway? A man's voice, deep and formal. Yes. This is Colonel Mark Reeves, United States Marine Corps. I'm calling about Corporal Miguel Torres. Grace sat up straighter. Is he? He's alive, Reeves said. Thanks to you. The doctors say another 5 minutes and he would have bled out. You saved his life. Grace closed her eyes. Relief hit her like a wave. I need to ask you something, Reeves continued. The hospital administration is claiming you acted recklessly, that you violated protocols. Is that accurate? Grace opened her eyes. Through her window, she could see the city waking up, cars on the street, people walking to work. Normal life, continuing. I carried him up 12 flights of stairs, she said quietly, because no one else would. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Where did you serve? Reeves asked. Grace's breath caught. I'm sorry? Combat medic training. I can hear it in the way you moved, the way you assessed the situation. You've been under fire before. Grace hadn't talked about that part of her life in years. Army, Iraq, 2015 to 2018. Why didn't the hospital know? I didn't tell them. It wasn't relevant. Another pause, then, it's relevant now. Ms. Holloway, I'm going to ask you to do something difficult. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't talk to anyone. Don't make any statements. Can you do that? Why? Because at 600 this morning, I made some calls, and by tomorrow, everyone's going to know what you did. His voice hardened. The hospital made a mistake. They're about to find out how big. The line went dead. Grace sat on her couch, phone in hand, watching the city move through another day. She felt numb, empty, like something had been hollowed out of her and nothing had filled the space yet. She didn't know what was coming, but somewhere in Crescent Falls, 500 Marines were already mobilizing. The morning stretched into afternoon. Grace sat in her apartment, still wearing the same clothes she'd put on after the shower, gray sweatpants and an old t-shirt. Her phone lay on the coffee table, silent. The colonel's words echoed in her head. Stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone. She tried to eat. Couldn't. Tried to sleep. Couldn't do that either. At 2 p.m., her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Check your email. Grace opened her laptop. 3 new messages. The first was from Mercy Ridge Hospital's HR department. Subject line, Notice of Suspension Hearing. She skimmed it. Formal language, administrative procedure. A hearing scheduled for Monday morning, 3 days away. She was ordered to appear and provide a written statement regarding multiple violations of hospital protocol and insubordination. Failure to appear would result in immediate termination. The second email was from Judith Crane directly. No subject line. Just 2 sentences. Your actions last night were reckless and dangerous. I will ensure you never work in healthcare again. Grace stared at the screen. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped hours ago. She felt something cold settling in her chest. Not fear, but something harder. Resignation, maybe. Or clarity. The third email was from an address she didn't recognize. m.reeves@usmc.mil. Colonel Reeves. She opened it. Ms. Holloway, Corporal Torres is out of surgery. Doctors say he'll make a full recovery. The bullet missed the subclavian artery by less than half an inch. Your pressure dressing kept him alive long enough to reach the OR. I've reviewed the security footage from last night. All of it. What I saw contradicts the hospital's official statement in several material ways. You should know that Corporal Torres was not involved in gang activity, as the hospital has suggested to local media. He was on medical leave visiting his sister who works in Crescent Falls. The shooting was targeted. We believe it was related to his deployment history. The suspects are in custody. I've also learned that the hospital delayed emergency response by 4 minutes while administrators debated liability protocols. 4 minutes you didn't have. I'm sending this email to inform you that the Marine Corps does not forget its own. And we don't forget those who stand up when others stand down. Respectfully, Colonel Mark Reeves. Grace read it twice, then closed the laptop. She walked to her bedroom closet and pulled out a cardboard box from the top shelf. Inside were things she hadn't looked at in years. Dog tags on a worn chain, a patch from her old unit, 3rd Infantry Division, combat medic, photographs of people she'd served with, some of whom hadn't made it home, a folded flag. She held the dog tags in her palm. The metal was cool and familiar. She'd been Grace Holloway, specialist, United States Army. She'd treated gunshot wounds in Mosul, stabilized blast injuries in Ramadi, carried a sergeant twice her size out of a burning Humvee and kept him breathing until the medevac arrived. Then she'd come home, finished nursing school, and spent 9 years being invisible. She put the dog tags back in the box and closed it. Night fell. Grace made soup she didn't eat and watched the sky darken through her window. The city lights blinked on one by one, familiar and distant. At midnight, her phone rang again. Colonel Reeves. Miss Holloway, I need you to listen very carefully. Tomorrow morning, something is going to happen. The hospital is not going to like it. The media is going to cover it. You need to be prepared. Prepared for what? Justice, Reeves said simply. The kind that doesn't ask permission. He paused. I looked into Mercy Ridge Hospital. You're not the first person Judith Crane has buried. In the last 5 years, 7 staff members have been terminated or forced to resign after reporting safety concerns. Every single one was overruled by administration. Every single one was threatened, just like you were. Grace felt something shift in her chest. How do you know that? Because I called them. All 7. Every one of them answered. Every one of them told me the same story. Crane runs that hospital like a fiefdom, and anyone who challenges her gets destroyed. Grace closed her eyes. She'd heard rumors, whispers in the break room, but she'd never known the scope. Tomorrow at 800, Reeves continued, I suggest you turn on the news. And Ms. Holloway, if the hospital contacts you before your hearing, if they offer you any kind of deal or settlement, do not accept it. Do you understand? I don't understand any of this. You will. Reeves's voice softened slightly. You did something last night that most people wouldn't have the courage to do. You're about to find out what that means. He hung up. Grace set her phone down and stared at the ceiling. Sleep was impossible now. She made coffee at 3 a.m. and watched infomercials with the sound off until the sky started to lighten. At 7:30, she turned on the local news. The anchor was talking about traffic, weather, a story about a local bakery. Grace was about to turn it off when the anchor's expression changed. We're getting reports of unusual activity outside Mercy Ridge Hospital this morning. We're going live to our reporter on the scene. The screen cut to a young woman standing in the hospital parking lot. Behind her, Grace could see movement, lots of movement. The reporter's voice was breathless. I'm here at Mercy Ridge Hospital, where, as you can see behind me, an extraordinary scene is unfolding. Starting about 30 minutes ago, members of the United States Marine Corps began arriving at the hospital. We're told there are now several hundred Marines gathered outside the main entrance. The camera panned across the parking lot. Grace's breath stopped. They were everywhere. Marines in dress blues standing in perfect formation, row after row after row, stretching from the hospital entrance across the entire front lawn. Silent. Motionless. At attention. We've reached out to hospital administration for comment, the reporter continued, but so far no official statement. We're also hearing reports that this gathering is connected to the shooting incident 2 nights ago, where a Marine was wounded outside this same entrance. The camera zoomed in on the formation. Grace could see their faces now, young and old, men and women, all standing with the same rigid discipline. At the front of the formation stood an officer with silver eagles on his shoulders, Colonel Reeves. Grace's phone rang. She ignored it, couldn't look away from the screen. The reporter was interviewing someone now, a hospital employee judging by the scrubs. "I've never seen anything like this," the woman was saying. "They just started showing up. No one told us they were coming. They're not doing anything, just standing there." More phones ringing, Grace's doorbell. She ignored everything. On screen, the hospital's front doors opened. Several people emerged, administrators in suits, security personnel, and in the center, Judith Crane. Even through the television, Grace could see the fury on her face. Judith approached Colonel Reeves. The camera couldn't pick up audio, but their body language told the story. Judith gesturing sharply, Reeves standing completely still, hands clasped behind his back. Judith's face getting redder, Reeves not moving an inch. The standoff lasted maybe 2 minutes. Then Judith spun on her heel and marched back inside. The doors closed behind her. The Marines didn't move. Grace's doorbell rang again, more insistent. She finally went to answer it. A woman stood in the hallway, late 30s, professional clothes, press credentials hanging from her neck. "Grace Holloway, I'm Jennifer Park, investigative reporter with the Crescent Falls Tribune. Can I ask you a few questions about—" Grace closed the door. The reporter knocked again. "Ms. Holloway, I know this is overwhelming, but the public has a right to know what happened that night. The hospital is claiming you acted recklessly, but the Marines clearly disagree. Will you make a statement?" Grace leaned her forehead against the door. "No comment. Is it true you're a combat veteran, that you served in Iraq?" Grace said nothing. "Ms. Holloway, 7 former Mercy Ridge employees have come forward in the last hour with allegations against Judith Crane. They say she's been systematically silencing whistleblowers for years. If you have information that could help expose—" "I said no comment." The reporter's voice softened. "I understand you're scared, but hiding won't make this go away. The story is already out there." Grace walked back to her living room and turned up the TV volume. The coverage had expanded. All 3 local networks were now broadcasting from outside Mercy Ridge. A crowd of civilians had gathered, people taking photos, holding signs, some of them visibly emotional. One sign read, "Thank you, Grace." Another, "Marines don't abandon their own." How did they know her name? Her phone buzzed. Text message from another unknown number. "Twitter is blowing up. Hashtag Mercy Ridge Marine trending nationally. Someone leaked your name." Grace opened Twitter on her laptop. The hashtag was everywhere. Photos of the Marine formation outside the hospital, screenshots of what looked like internal hospital emails. And yes, her name, dozens of tweets calling her a hero, demanding the hospital reinstate her, sharing what little information was publicly available. One tweet had over 50,000 retweets. This nurse carried a wounded Marine up 200 stairs while her supervisors tried to stop her. Now the hospital wants to fire her. This is what courage looks like. Attached was a photo, grainy security camera footage showing Grace in the stairwell, Torres on her back, Judith Crane visible at the bottom of the frame. Who had leaked that? Her phone rang. Not Reeves this time. The caller ID said, "Mercy Ridge Hospital." Grace let it ring. It went to voicemail. 30 seconds later it rang again, same number. She let it ring. On the 3rd call she answered. "Ms. Holloway." A male voice, smooth and carefully controlled. "This is Richard Brennan, CEO of Mercy Ridge Hospital. I believe we need to talk." Grace said nothing. "I'm aware of the situation developing outside the hospital this morning. I'm also aware that certain information has been made public that may not reflect the full context of Thursday night's events." He paused. "I'd like to invite you to meet with me privately before your scheduled hearing on Monday. I think we can resolve this matter in a way that's beneficial for everyone involved." "What kind of resolution?" "Let's discuss that in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon? Say 3 p.m. Grace looked at the TV. The Marines were still there, unmoved. "What about my suspension?" "Consider it under review. Ms. Holloway, I want to be clear. The hospital values your service. We recognize that Thursday night was an extraordinary circumstance, and perhaps certain administrative responses were," he cleared his throat, "overly procedural given the urgency of the situation." Translation, they were panicking. "I'll think about it," Grace said. "Ms. Holloway, I strongly encourage you to accept this meeting. The media attention is only going to intensify. The hospital is prepared to make a very generous offer, but that offer has a limited window." "I said I'll think about it." She hung up. 5 minutes later, Colonel Reeves called. Did the hospital contact you? He asked without preamble. Yes. They want to meet. Don't go. Not yet. They're trying to contain this before it explodes completely. His voice was hard. They're going to offer you money, a reinstatement with conditions, and a non-disclosure agreement. They'll make it sound generous. It's a trap. What do you want me to do? Wait. Let the pressure build. Right now you have leverage you don't even understand yet. The hospital is vulnerable. Crane is vulnerable. But only if you don't give them an exit. Grace rubbed her eyes. She was exhausted. Colonel, I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I just want my job back. Your job? Reeves's voice rose slightly. Ms. Holloway, with all due respect, you're thinking too small. That hospital tried to end your career because you saved a man's life. They threatened you, humiliated you, and threw you away like garbage. And they've done it to others before you. I know, but nothing. You didn't start this fight. They did. All I'm doing is making sure they finish it on your terms, not theirs. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Outside her apartment window, she could hear traffic. Normal city sounds, the world continuing. How long do the Marines stay there? She asked finally. As long as it takes. Takes for what? For everyone to understand what happened. For the hospital to admit what they did. For justice. He paused. I've got 3 reporters from national outlets calling me every 10 minutes. The story's going to hit the evening news cycle. By tomorrow morning, this won't be a local issue anymore. It'll be national. Grace felt dizzy. I didn't ask for any of this. No, Reeves agreed. You just asked to save a man's life. Everything else is consequence. After he hung up, Grace sat in silence. The apartment felt smaller somehow, suffocating. She grabbed her keys and left, ignoring the reporters still waiting in the hallway. She drove without destination, just moving through the city. Crescent Falls looked the same as always, strip malls and residential streets, coffee shops and gas stations. But Grace felt disconnected from it, like she was watching through glass. She ended up at a park on the east side, sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. A few ducks paddled near the shore. An old man was feeding them bread, tossing pieces that landed with small splashes. Her phone rang constantly. She turned it off. The sun moved across the sky. Grace watched the ducks and tried to remember who she'd been 3 days ago. The invisible nurse. The woman who kept her head down. That person felt like a stranger now. At 5 p.m., she turned her phone back on. 47 missed calls, dozens of text messages, and 1 voicemail from a number she recognized, her younger sister, Amy. Grace called her back. Oh my God, Grace, what the hell is happening? Amy's voice was high and frantic. You're all over the news. Neat. There are Marines at the hospital. People are saying you're a hero. I tried calling you 20 times. I'm fine. You're not fine. This is insane. Why didn't you tell me you were a combat medic? Why didn't you tell me any of this? Grace watched the ducks. One of them was chasing another in circles, wings flapping. It wasn't important. Not important? Grace, you saved a man's life. Amy's voice cracked. I saw the video, the security footage. You carried him up all those stairs by yourself. How did you even do that? Training. That's not an answer. Grace was quiet. Amy's tone changed, softening. What are you going to do? I don't know. The hospital's going to try to bury you. You know that, right? They're going to... Amy. Grace closed her eyes. I can't think about that right now. I need some time. Okay. Amy took a shaky breath. I'm here if you need me. I mean it. Whatever you need. I know. After they hung up, Grace sat on the bench until the sun started to set. The old man left. The ducks settled down for the night. The park emptied out until it was just her and the darkening sky. She drove home as night fell. The reporter was gone from her hallway. Inside her apartment, everything was exactly as she'd left it. TV still on, showing more coverage from outside the hospital. The Marines were still there, illuminated now by streetlights and camera crews. Grace turned off the TV and sat in the dark. At 9 p.m., someone knocked on her door. Not the aggressive knocking from before. Soft. Almost hesitant. Grace looked through the peephole. A young man in marine dress blues stood in the hallway, cover tucked under his arm. Early 20s, nervous. She opened the door. "Miss Holloway?" His voice was quiet. "I'm Lance Corporal David Chen. I served with Corporal Torres in Afghanistan." He swallowed. "I just wanted to say thank you." "Miguel, Corporal Torres, he's my friend. What you did for him." His voice broke. He cleared his throat. "I'm sorry. I just needed you to know that it mattered, that he matters." Grace felt something crack in her chest. "Is he okay?" "Yes, ma'am. I saw him this afternoon. He's weak, but he's talking. He's going to make it." Chen's eyes were bright. "Because of you." Grace couldn't speak. She just nodded. Chen straightened. "The colonel sent me to give you this." He held out a business card. He said if you need anything at all, you call that number, day or night. Someone will answer. Grace took the card. It was simple, just a name and a phone number. Colonel Mark Reeves. "Thank you," she managed. Chen came to attention, saluted. "Semper Fi, ma'am." He left before she could respond. Grace closed the door and leaned against it. She looked at the card in her hand. On the back, someone had written in neat handwriting, "You carried one of ours. Now we carry you." She went to bed that night and actually slept. Deep, dreamless sleep that lasted until her phone woke her at 6 a.m. Colonel Reeves. Again. Grace answered. "Hello?" "Turn on the news, Channel 7. She stumbled to the living room and grabbed the remote. Channel 7 showed a press conference in progress. The banner at the bottom read, "Mercy Ridge Hospital. Live." Richard Brennan stood at a podium reading from a prepared statement. "Deeply regret the events of Thursday evening and the confusion that followed. Mercy Ridge Hospital maintains the highest standards of patient care and staff conduct. We are conducting a thorough internal review to determine," a reporter interrupted. "Mr. Brennan, why were the elevators shut down while Nurse Holloway was trying to transport a critical patient?" Brennan's expression tightened. "That decision was made in accordance with lockdown protocols during an active security threat. But the threat was external. The shooter had fled. Your own security footage shows—" "We're not going to litigate this in the media. Next question." Another reporter. "Is it true that Judith Crane, your assistant director of operations, threatened Nurse Holloway with suspension if she helped the wounded Marine?" "Ms. Crane was following established protocol. Protocol that prioritizes liability over saving lives?" Brennan's jaw clenched. "That's an unfair characterization. Next question. Have you reached out to Grace Holloway to apologize?" "We've been in contact with Ms. Holloway and are working toward an amicable resolution." Grace stared at the screen. That was a lie. They'd called once. She hadn't agreed to anything. The questions kept coming, harder and sharper. Brennan's responses got more defensive. The press conference fell apart slowly, question by question, until Brennan finally cut it short and walked away from the podium. The screen cut back to the studio. The anchor looked grim. That was Richard Brennan, CEO of Mercy Ridge Hospital, attempting to address the growing controversy surrounding the treatment of Nurse Grace Holloway. For those just joining us, we have confirmed that the Marine Corps has maintained a continuous presence outside the hospital for over 24 hours now, with no indication of when they plan to leave. Grace's phone buzzed. Text from Colonel Reeves. "That press conference just made everything worse for them. Brennan looks guilty, and he knows it." Another text. "Hospital board is meeting in emergency session this morning. Sources say Crane's position is under review." Another. "Stay strong." This is almost over. Grace set down her phone. She felt numb, disconnected, like she was watching someone else's life unfold on a screen. At 8 a.m., her doorbell rang. Not a reporter this time, a courier with a certified letter. Grace signed for it and tore open the envelope. Official letterhead from Mercy Ridge Hospital. A formal offer of reinstatement, effective immediately. Full back pay. A written apology. And attached, a non-disclosure agreement that ran 12 pages. She was reading through it when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Grace Holloway?" A woman's voice, older and tired. "Yes?" My name is Patricia Wells. I was a nurse at Mercy Ridge until 3 years ago. I saw your story on the news. She paused. Judith Crane destroyed my career because I reported a doctor for performing surgery while impaired. She made sure I could never work in Crescent Falls again. Told every hospital in the region I was a troublemaker. Grace sat down slowly. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Fight back. Patricia's voice hardened. I didn't have the courage to stand up to her, but you do. You already proved that. I don't know if Those Marines aren't outside that hospital for nothing. They're there because you did something Crane couldn't break. Don't let her win now by taking their money and signing their silence. Patricia took a shaky breath. I called because I want you to know you're not alone. There are 7 of us. All fired or forced out, all threatened. We're ready to testify if this goes to court. We're ready to tell the truth. Grace felt something shift, the numbness cracking. Why now? Because someone finally had the guts to fight back. And if you're willing to keep fighting, we'll stand with you. After Patricia hung up, Grace sat with the non-disclosure agreement in her hands. 12 pages of legal language designed to make her disappear, to bury the truth, to protect the people who tried to destroy her. She thought about Torres in that stairwell, about her legs shaking, about Judith Crane's voice echoing up the shaft. You're done. Grace picked up her phone and called Colonel Reeves. I'm not taking their deal, she said when he answered. A pause. Then, are you sure? Yes. This is going to get harder before it gets better. They're going to come at you with everything they have. Grace looked at the NDA in her hands, thought about Patricia Wells and 6 others whose names she didn't even know yet, thought about all the people who'd been silenced before her. Let them come, she said. Reeves was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been pride. All right then, here's what happens next. Grace listened as he laid out the plan. The Marines would maintain their presence, the media pressure would continue. Patricia Wells and the other former employees would go public with their stories. Everything would build toward Monday morning's hearing. One more thing, Reeves said. Torres wants to see you. He's been asking since yesterday. Are you willing? Grace's throat tightened. Yes. I'll arrange it, this afternoon. The hospital's going to hate it, but they can't stop him from having visitors. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We're just getting started. That afternoon, Grace walked through the front doors of Mercy Ridge Hospital for the first time since Thursday night. The lobby was crowded with media, hospital staff, and curious onlookers. Cameras swung toward her the moment she entered. Questions erupted from all sides. Grace kept her head up and walked straight through. Security tried to stop her at the elevator bank, but Colonel Reeves appeared as if from nowhere and said simply, She's with me. They rode up in silence. Ward 7, the surgical recovery wing, the same floor where she'd collapsed 3 nights ago. Torres was in a private room, propped up in bed with his right shoulder heavily bandaged. He looked pale but alert. When Grace walked in, his eyes widened. Ma'am? He started, trying to sit up straighter. Don't, Grace said quickly. Just rest. Torres settled back but didn't take his eyes off her. They told me what you did. The stairs. All of it. His voice was rough. I don't remember much, but I remember you saying you had me, and I believed you. Grace pulled a chair close to the bed and sat. How are you feeling? Like I got shot. A faint smile. But alive. Because of you. The doctors did the hard part. The doctors had 12 floors in 8 minutes because you carried me there. Torres's expression grew serious. I heard what the hospital's trying to do, what Crane said to you. That's not right. It's complicated. No, ma'am, it's not. Torres's jaw set. You saved my life, and they tried to punish you for it. That's not complicated. That's wrong. Grace didn't know what to say to that. Torres reached out his left hand, his good side. Grace took it. His grip was weak but steady. Thank you, he said quietly, for not leaving me. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. You're welcome. They sat like that for a few minutes. No more words needed. When Grace finally left the room, Colonel Reeves was waiting in the hallway. How is he? Strong, Grace said. He's going to be fine. Reeves nodded. Good. Because tomorrow morning, he's going to give a statement to the press, and it's going to change everything. Grace looked at him. What kind of statement? The truth, all of it. What happened that night? What you did? What Crane did? Reeves' expression was hard. The hospital can spin all they want, but they can't spin around a Marine corporal telling the world that he's only alive because a nurse defied orders to save him. Grace felt something lodge in her throat. This is really happening. Yes, ma'am. And come Monday morning, when you walk into that hearing, you're going to have 500 Marines, 7 whistleblowers, and the truth on your side. He met her eyes. The question is, are you ready for what comes after? Grace thought about the non-disclosure agreement sitting on her kitchen counter, about Judith Crane's face when the doors had closed, about Torres's hand in hers. I'm ready, she said. That night, Grace slept better than she had in years. And the next morning, when Miguel Torres appeared on national television and told his story, every detail, every moment, every truth, the world finally heard what one nurse had done when everyone else had walked away. Within an hour, Judith Crane's office was empty. By noon, every major news outlet in the country was running the story. Torres's interview had gone viral within minutes, his face pale against the hospital pillow, his voice steady as he described Grace carrying him up those stairs while administrators tried to stop her. The clip had been viewed 12 million times before lunch. Grace watched it once on her phone, then turned off the screen. She couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile the story Torres was telling with her own memory of that night. In her version, she'd just been trying not to drop him. In his version, she was something else entirely. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since the interview aired. Reporters, lawyers, advocacy groups, strangers offering support. She let most calls go to voicemail, but at 1 p.m., a call came through from a number she recognized, the hospital's main line. Not Brennan this time, not Crane, someone else. Grace answered. Hello? Ms. Holloway, this is Margaret Sutton. I'm the chair of Mercy Ridge Hospital's board of directors. The voice was older, precise, carrying the kind of authority that didn't need to be loud. I believe it's time we spoke directly. About what? About ending this situation before it destroys the hospital completely. A pause. I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because I've spent the last 24 hours reviewing everything that happened Thursday night, and I need you to understand something. I had no idea Judith Crane was operating the way she was. Grace said nothing. Sutton continued. I've been on this board for 16 years. In that time, I've trusted my administrators to handle operational decisions. That trust was misplaced. The board is meeting in emergency session this afternoon to discuss Ms. Crane's future with the organization, among other matters. Are you firing her? That decision will be made today, but I'm not calling about Crane. I'm calling about you. Sutton's tone shifted slightly. Your hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. I'd like to cancel it. Why? Because there's nothing to hear. You violated no protocols worth defending. You saved a man's life while following your medical training and ethical obligations. Suspending you was a mistake. Threatening you was unconscionable. Sutton took a breath. I'm prepared to offer you full reinstatement with immediate effect, a formal written apology from the board, and a guarantee that no retaliatory action will ever be taken against you. Additionally, I'm offering you a promotion to senior staff nurse with a significant salary increase. Grace walked to her window and looked out at the city. What about the NDA? There won't be one. You're free to speak about these events however you choose. And the other nurses? The ones Crane silenced? A longer pause. That's more complicated. Those cases occurred under different circumstances. They occurred because Crane destroyed anyone who questioned her, just like she tried to destroy me. Ms. Holloway, I can't undo the past, but I can ensure it doesn't happen again. I'm proposing the creation of a whistleblower protection policy, independent ethics oversight, and a complete review of our administrative procedures. Sutton's voice hardened slightly. This hospital serves 40,000 patients a year. It employs over 2,000 people. What Crane did was wrong, but burning down the institution won't help anyone. Grace watched traffic move through the streets below. What happens to Crane? If the board votes as I expect, she'll be terminated this afternoon. No severance beyond contractual obligations, no recommendations. Her career in hospital administration is over. Not good enough. Sutton was quiet for a moment. What would be good enough? Grace hadn't planned what she was about to say. The words came from somewhere deeper than thought. I want you to contact every person Crane forced out. Offer them the same opportunity you're offering me. Reinstatement or compensation. Public acknowledgement of what was done to them. And I want you to implement the protection policies before I come back, not after. Prove you mean it. That could take months. It could cost. I don't care how long it takes or what it costs. Those people deserve justice, not just me. Grace's voice was steady. If you're serious about making this right, that's what it requires. Another pause. Grace could hear papers rustling on the other end of the line. I'll need to present this to the board, Sutton said finally. But yes, I believe we can make that happen. Then cancel the hearing. I'll come back when the policies are in place. Ms. Holloway, the media attention isn't going to disappear. The Marines are still outside the hospital. Every day this continues, the damage compounds. Surely you understand, the Marines aren't there because I asked them to be. They're there because one of their own nearly died while hospital administrators debated liability. Grace's grip tightened on her phone. If you want them to leave, maybe you should ask yourself why they showed up in the first place. She hung up before Sutton could respond. 10 minutes later, Colonel Reeves called. The board's in session, he said without preamble. My contact inside says they're voting on Crane in the next hour. It's not going to be close. Sutton called me. Offered reinstatement and policy changes. Are you taking it? Grace told him what she'd asked for. Reeves was quiet as he listened. That's good, he said when she finished. That's exactly right. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore. I never wanted to fight at all. I know, but you are, and you're winning. Reeves paused. There's something else you need to know. The FBI is getting involved. Grace felt ice slide down her spine. What? The shooting. The suspects in custody aren't talking, but there's evidence suggesting Torres was targeted specifically because of his role in a classified operation overseas. This wasn't random gang violence like the hospital initially reported. It was attempted murder with possible ties to foreign actors. How does that affect? It means the hospital's initial statements to police and media were factually wrong. They characterized Torres as a gang violence victim to minimize their own liability. They lied to investigators. Reeves's voice was grim. The FBI is treating that as potential obstruction. Brennan and Crane are both being questioned. Grace sat down hard. This is spiraling. No, this is consequences. Reeves's tone softened slightly. Listen to me. None of this is your fault. You saved a man's life. Everything that's happening now, the board panic, the FBI investigation, the media firestorm, all of that existed before you picked Torres up. You just forced it into the light. I just want it to stop. It will, soon. But first it has to burn through. That afternoon, Grace stayed away from the news. She cleaned her apartment, did laundry, tried to pretend her life wasn't being dissected in real time across every media platform in America. But at 4 p.m., her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Amy. Turn on Channel 7, right now. Grace grabbed the remote. Channel 7 showed the Mercy Ridge Hospital boardroom. Margaret Sutton stood at a podium, reading from a prepared statement. After careful review of the events of Thursday evening and subsequent investigation into administrative conduct, the board has voted unanimously to terminate Judith Crane's employment with Mercy Ridge Hospital effective immediately. Additionally, Chief of Security Daniel Morrison and Assistant Administrator Carl Wu have been placed on administrative leave pending further investigation into their roles in the incident. The room erupted with questions. Sutton raised a hand for silence. Furthermore, the board has voted to implement immediate reforms, including independent ethics oversight, whistleblower protection protocols, and a full review of emergency response procedures. We have also voted to offer Grace Holloway full reinstatement with our sincere apologies for the treatment she received. More questions. Sutton's expression remained composed. Ms. Holloway has requested that we extend similar consideration to other former employees who may have been subjected to retaliatory practices. The board has agreed. We are reaching out to all former staff members who left under disputed circumstances in the past 5 years to discuss remediation. A reporter shouted over the others. Has Ms. Holloway accepted your offer? We have not yet reached final terms, but we are in active discussion. What about the FBI investigation? Sutton's composure cracked slightly. We are cooperating fully with all law enforcement inquiries. No further comment on that matter. The press conference continued, but Grace turned off the TV. Her hands were shaking, not from fear this time, from something else. Relief, maybe, or vindication, or the strange, hollow feeling that comes when a fight you never wanted suddenly ends. Her phone rang. Patricia Wells. Did you see? Patricia's voice was thick with emotion. Did you see what you did? I didn't. Yes, you did. Grace, they're calling all of us. The hospital is actually calling. They want to make it right. Patricia laughed, a sound caught between joy and tears. I never thought I'd see this day. Never thought anyone would hold them accountable. Grace closed her eyes. I'm glad. The others want to meet you. All 7 of us. We want to thank you properly. You don't need to thank me. Yes, Patricia said firmly. We do. They arranged to meet Wednesday evening, 2 days away. Grace agreed because she didn't know how to say no, didn't know how to explain that she felt like a fraud, accepting gratitude for something that had simply been the only option available. That night, Grace tried to sleep but couldn't. The silence in her apartment felt oppressive. At 2 a.m., she gave up and drove to the hospital. The Marines were still there. Fewer now, maybe 200 instead of 500, but still maintaining their vigil. They stood in neat formations under streetlights, relief shifts rotating every 4 hours. No one had ordered them to stay. They just did. Grace parked across the street and watched them for a while. A few civilians had joined the watch, people holding candles, some with signs supporting Grace or Torres. It had become a kind of impromptu memorial, except no one had died. A celebration of life instead of death. A figure approached her car. Grace tensed, then recognized the uniform. Colonel Reeves. She rolled down her window. Shouldn't you be sleeping? Could ask you the same thing. Reeves leaned against her car. Can't sleep when history's happening. This isn't history. It's just... Grace gestured helplessly at the scene. Chaos. No, chaos is what happens when systems fail and nobody cares enough to fix them. This is the opposite. This is people caring so much they refuse to look away. Reeves glanced at the Marines. You know why they're really here? Grace shook her head. Because every single one of them has been in a situation where someone had a choice, help or walk away. And someone chose to help. Maybe it was a medic who stopped the bleeding. Maybe it was a buddy who pulled them out of a burning vehicle. Maybe it was a stranger who gave them water in 120-degree heat. Reeves met her eyes. They're here because you made the same choice they've seen save lives before. And in our world, that choice is sacred. Grace felt her throat tighten. I wasn't trying to be sacred. I was just trying to do your job. I know. That's what makes it matter. Reeves straightened. Go home, get some sleep. Monday's going to be intense whether the hearing happens or not. Grace drove home as the city slept around her, but Monday felt very far away. Sunday morning brought news that Judith Crane had been arrested. Grace learned about it from a text from Colonel Reeves. FB. I just took Crane into custody. Obstruction of justice. False statements to federal investigators. She's facing federal charges. The story exploded across every network within the hour. Footage of Crane being led from her home in handcuffs, head down, no comment to reporters. Federal prosecutors confirmed they were investigating whether Mercy Ridge Hospital had deliberately mischaracterized the Torres shooting to avoid liability and security scrutiny. Grace watched the coverage with a strange detachment. This woman who had threatened to destroy her career, who had blocked her from helping Torres, who had silenced 7 others before her, this woman was now in federal custody. The reversal was so complete it didn't feel real. Her phone rang constantly. More interview requests, more lawyers offering representation, more advocacy groups wanting her to speak at events. Grace ignored all of it. At 3 p.m., Margaret Sutton called again. Ms. Holloway, I assume you've seen the news about Judith Crane. Yes. I want to assure you the board had no knowledge of any false statements made to investigators. We're cooperating fully with the FBI, and we've retained independent counsel to conduct our own internal investigation. Grace said nothing. I'm calling because the situation has changed significantly. Your Monday hearing is formally canceled. The hospital is prepared to issue a public apology and announce your reinstatement at a press conference Tuesday morning. We'd like you to attend. Will the other nurses be there, the ones you're reaching out to? We're still in discussions with them. These matters take time to... Then I'm not attending. Grace's voice was flat. If you want a press conference celebrating justice, make sure there's actually justice for everyone involved, not just the person who got famous. Sutton was quiet for a long moment. You're making this very difficult. Good. Ms. Holloway, I'm trying to do the right thing here, but I also have a hospital to run. I have patients who need care, staff who need leadership, and a community that needs to know we're taking this seriously. Working with you would make that easier. I'm not here to make your life easier. I'm here to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Fine, Sutton's voice turned crisp. Then help me do that. Come to the press conference. Stand with us, show the community that we're moving forward together. After you've made things right with everyone Crane hurt, not before. That could take weeks. Then it takes weeks. Grace hung up and immediately felt exhausted. She'd never been good at confrontation, had spent most of her life avoiding it, but something had shifted inside her in that stairwell, something that made backing down impossible now. Monday morning arrived without a hearing to attend. Grace woke up at 6 a.m. out of habit, then realized she had nowhere to be. The day stretched ahead, empty and strange. She made coffee and opened her laptop. Her email was flooded. Messages from former colleagues, from nursing organizations, from complete strangers. One subject line caught her eye. From a Marine mom. She opened it. Dear Grace, my son served with Miguel Torres in Afghanistan. He was killed in an IED blast 2 years ago. Miguel was one of the Marines who carried his body to safety under fire. When I heard what you did for Miguel, I cried for the first time in months. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. You gave a mother somewhere the gift I lost, her son coming home alive. Thank you for being brave when others weren't. Thank you for proving that there are still people who choose courage over convenience. May you be blessed with every good thing. Sincerely, Karen Torres. No relation, but it feels like family now. Grace read it 3 times, then closed the laptop because she couldn't see the screen anymore. At 10 a.m., Colonel Reeves called with an update. The Marines were standing down at noon. The vigil was ending. It's time, Reeves said. We've made our point. The hospital knows the world is watching. Staying longer would just be theater. Okay, Grace said quietly, but before we go, there's something we'd like to do. If you're willing. What? The Marines want to present you with something, a token of appreciation. It would mean a lot to them if you'd accept it in person. Grace hesitated. I know you don't, but they do. Let them say thank you properly. She agreed because saying no felt impossible. At 11:30, Grace arrived at Mercy Ridge Hospital for the second time since Thursday night. The parking lot was still crowded with media and onlookers, but the atmosphere had changed, less frantic, more ceremonial. The Marines stood in perfect formation, exactly as they had for days. But now a path had been cleared through their ranks, leading to where Colonel Reeves stood at the center. Grace walked through the formation. Every Marine she passed came to attention. Not saluting, she wasn't military, but showing respect in the only way they knew how. Standing perfectly still, eyes forward, honor rendered through discipline. She reached Reeves, who held a wooden case in his hands. Ms. Holloway, he said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. On behalf of every Marine here, and on behalf of Corporal Miguel Torres, we present you with this. He opened the case. Inside was a folded American flag and a plaque. The plaque read, Presented to Grace Holloway, R.N., in recognition of extraordinary courage and selfless service. When others hesitated, you acted. When others looked away, you carried the weight. Semper Fidelis. Grace took the case with shaking hands. Thank you. No, ma'am, Reeves said quietly. Thank you. He stepped back and saluted. Every Marine in the formation followed. 200 salutes held perfectly still, rendered to a civilian nurse who'd never asked for any of this. Grace stood there, holding the case, trying not to cry in front of cameras she could hear clicking all around her. The moment stretched. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds of absolute silence except for the wind moving through the ranks. Then Reeves dropped his salute. The formation dissolved. Marines broke ranks and approached her one by one, shaking her hand, thanking her quietly, then filing toward the buses waiting to take them back to base. It took 20 minutes for them all to leave. Grace stood in the parking lot until the last bus pulled away, the case still in her hands. A reporter approached. "Miss Holloway, how does it feel to—" "No comment," Grace said automatically. She walked back to her car, set the case carefully in the passenger seat, and drove away from Mercy Ridge Hospital one more time. But this time she knew she was coming back. Tuesday morning, Grace woke to discover that Margaret Sutton had been busy. The news was full of announcements. Mercy Ridge Hospital had reached agreements with all 7 former employees. 5 were accepting reinstatement with back pay and formal apologies. 2 had chosen financial settlements and public acknowledgement instead. The hospital was implementing every policy Grace had demanded, and they wanted her to attend the press conference that afternoon. Grace called Patricia Wells. "Are you going?" she asked. "Yes, all of us who are coming back are going. It feels important, like closing a chapter." Patricia paused. "Will you be there?" Grace looked at the flag case sitting on her kitchen counter. "Yes, I'll be there." The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. Grace arrived early and was escorted to a private room where the other nurses were waiting. 7 women, ranging in age from late 20s to early 60s. They all turned when Grace entered. Patricia stepped forward first and hugged her without asking permission. The others followed. Grace stood there, surrounded by strangers who weren't strangers anymore, and finally let herself cry. "We thought we were alone," one woman said, Sandra Chen, a former ICU nurse who'd been fired for reporting inadequate staffing levels. "We thought no one would ever believe us." "She made us feel crazy," another added. Rebecca Martinez, terminated for questioning a medication protocol. "Like we were the problem." Grace wiped her eyes. "You weren't the problem. You were right." At 2 p.m., they all walked onto the stage together. 8 nurses who'd been broken by the same system and were now standing in front of cameras to prove they'd survived. Margaret Sutton spoke first, reading a prepared statement acknowledging the hospital's failures and outlining the new policies. Then she invited each nurse to speak if they chose. 5 of them did. They told their stories, calm, factual accounts of being threatened, silenced, and discarded for trying to do the right thing. The room was silent except for their voices and the click of cameras. When it was Grace's turn, she almost declined, but she looked at the women standing beside her and found words she didn't know she had. "I'm not a hero," she said, her voice steady. "I'm a nurse who did what nurses do. I helped someone who needed help. What happened after shouldn't have been a fight. It should have been standard procedure." She paused. But it became a fight because systems were broken. Because people prioritized reputation over responsibility. Because others had fought the same battle before me and lost. Grace looked at Patricia, at Sandra, at Rebecca, and the others. "This isn't just my story. It's theirs too. And it's the story of everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet when they should speak up, to stand down when they should stand firm." She turned back to the cameras. "I hope what happened here means the next person won't have to fight this hard. Won't have to carry someone up 200 stairs alone because the elevator's been locked down for liability reasons. Won't have to risk everything to do what's right." She stepped back. The room erupted with questions, but Sutton raised a hand. "We're not taking questions today. This press conference was about acknowledgement and commitment. The hospital has said what needed to be said. Now we need to prove it through action." As they filed off the stage, reporters pressed forward, but security kept them back. Grace made it to the hallway and leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Colonel Reeves appeared from somewhere. That was good. Grace looked up at him. "Is it over now?" "The public part? Mostly. The rest?" He shrugged. "That's up to you." That night, Grace sat in her apartment and finally allowed herself to think about going back to work. Back to Mercy Ridge, to the geriatric ward, to 12-hour shifts and difficult patients and all the ordinary challenges that had nothing to do with national news coverage. Her phone rang one more time. Miguel Torres. "Ma'am, they're discharging me tomorrow. I'm heading back to base to finish recovery." His voice was stronger now. "I wanted to thank you again before I left, and to tell you something. What's that? The colonel told me what you've been fighting for. The other nurses, the policy changes, all of it. Torres paused. You didn't just save my life. You're saving a lot of lives by making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Grace felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the simple satisfaction of knowing she'd done enough. Thank you, Miguel. No, ma'am. Thank you. For everything. After he hung up, Grace walked to her window and looked out at Crescent Falls. The city looked the same as always. Lights in windows, traffic on streets, life continuing in all its messy complexity. But something had changed. Not the city. Her. She'd climbed those stairs thinking only about the next step, about keeping Torres alive long enough to reach help. She hadn't thought about justice or policy reform or inspiring other people. She'd just climbed. But somewhere in that stairwell, something fundamental had shifted. The woman who'd kept her head down for 9 years had found her spine, and now that she'd found it, she couldn't imagine going back to being invisible. Wednesday morning, Grace woke early and dressed in clean scrubs for the first time in a week. She made coffee, ate breakfast, and checked the news one last time. The story was already fading from the front pages. New crises, new headlines, new attention cycles. In another week, most people would forget her name, but Mercy Ridge Hospital wouldn't forget. The 7 other nurses wouldn't forget. And every patient who benefited from the new policies would exist in a world made slightly safer by what had happened in that stairwell. Grace picked up her keys and headed for the door. Her phone buzzed with a final text from Colonel Reeves. Proud of you, Semper Fi. She smiled and typed back, thank you for everything. Then she drove to Mercy Ridge Hospital, parked in the staff lot, and walked through the front entrance with her head up and her badge clipped to her scrubs. The lobby was quiet. Morning shift change, people focused on their work. A few colleagues glanced at her. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. Others nodded in acknowledgement. One older doctor stopped and said simply, "Welcome back, Holloway." Grace took the elevator to the 12th floor, Ward 7, the surgical wing where Torres had survived, where she'd collapsed after carrying him up 216 stairs. The ward supervisor, a woman Grace had worked with for 6 years, looked up from the nurse's station. "Grace," she said quietly, "good to have you back." "Good to be back. Patient in 712 needs vitals. IV change in 718, and there's fresh coffee in the break room." The supervisor's expression softened slightly. "We kept your locker exactly as you left it." Grace nodded, swallowing against unexpected emotion. "Thank you." She dropped her bag in the break room, poured coffee she didn't really want, and walked to room 712. A routine patient, routine vitals, routine documentation, the ordinary, invisible work that kept people alive one small action at a time. She was checking the IV in room 718 when her new supervisor appeared in the doorway. Not the woman from the nurse's station, someone from administration, someone Grace had never met. "Ms. Holloway, I'm Director Chen, Head of Nursing Services. Do you have a moment?" Grace's stomach tightened. Of course. They walked to a small conference room. Director Chen closed the door and gestured for Grace to sit. "I wanted to introduce myself properly and discuss your new position. As you know, you've been promoted to senior staff nurse with expanded responsibilities. I wasn't aware the promotion had been finalized. As of this morning," Chen slid a folder across the table. "New contract, new salary, new authority to propose and implement protocol changes. The board wants you involved in the Ethics Oversight Committee as well." Grace opened the folder and scanned the documents. The salary increase was significant. The responsibilities were exactly what she'd want if she'd designed the position herself. "There's one more thing," Chen said. "The hospital is creating a new patient advocacy role, someone who can intervene when administrative priorities conflict with patient care. We'd like you to help design that position and serve in an advisory capacity." Grace looked up. "Why me?" "Because you've already proven you'll prioritize patients over politics. That's exactly what we need." Chen's expression was sincere. "The hospital made terrible mistakes. We're trying to ensure those mistakes never happen again. But we can't do it without people willing to challenge us when we're wrong." Grace thought about Judith Crane's face when she'd said "you're done," thought about climbing those stairs with Torres on her back, thought about the 7 other nurses who'd fought the same battle and lost. I want it in writing that patient advocacy decisions can't be overruled by administrators without full board review. Chen didn't hesitate. Done. What else? Quarterly audits of all terminations and disciplinary actions, public reporting on ethics complaints, and direct access to the board for anyone filing a safety concern. The board will need to approve that level of transparency. Then get their approval. Otherwise, I'm just a senior nurse with a fancy title and no real authority to change anything. Chen studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile, not the practiced corporate kind. I'll present it to the board this afternoon. I think you'll be surprised how eager they are to say yes. She stood and extended her hand. Grace shook it. Welcome back, Ms. Holloway. I have a feeling this hospital is going to be very different with you in it. After Chen left, Grace sat alone in the conference room, looking at the contract in front of her. A week ago, she'd been an invisible night shift nurse on the edge of being fired. Now she was redesigning hospital policy and advising on ethics oversight. The absurdity of it made her laugh, a short, exhausted sound that echoed in the empty room. Her phone buzzed. Margaret Sutton this time, not calling, but texting. Board approved all your conditions, contract addendum being prepared. You start the advocacy role next month. Thank you for pushing us. We needed it. Grace texted back. Thank you for listening. She left the conference room and returned to her patients. Room 720 needed medication. Room 724 had questions about discharge procedures. Room 716 wanted someone to sit with them for a few minutes because they were scared and alone. Grace sat. The work was the same. The hospital was the same. But the weight was different, lighter somehow, even with the new responsibilities, because now she knew she could push back, could stand firm, could climb stairs when elevators failed and survive the consequences. At 5 p.m., her shift ended. Grace logged her notes, said goodbye to colleagues, and took the elevator down to the lobby. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the parking lot in gold and orange light. She walked to her car and found something tucked under the windshield wiper. A note on hospital letterhead, handwritten in neat cursive. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Ward 7 nurses. Grace folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. She drove home through rush hour traffic, parked in her usual spot, climbed the stairs to her apartment. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Coffee cup in the sink, laptop on the table, flag case on the counter. She picked up the case and opened it, read the plaque again. When others hesitated, you acted. Grace closed the case and set it back down. Then she made dinner, watched mindless TV, and went to bed early because tomorrow was another shift and patients would need her. But in the darkness, just before sleep took her, she thought about Torres lying on that pavement, about the choice she'd made in the seconds after Judith Crane had told her to step back. She'd made the right choice. Not the safe one or the easy one. Just the right one. And tomorrow, if faced with the same choice, she'd make it again. Somewhere across the city, Miguel Torres was packing his belongings to return to base. Somewhere in federal custody, Judith Crane was facing the consequences of years of silencing truth. Somewhere in boardrooms and break rooms and quiet conversations, people were learning that courage didn't require permission. And in a small apartment in Crescent Falls, Grace Holloway, former invisible nurse, current senior staff nurse, future architect of change, finally slept without nightmares for the first time in a week. But at 3 a.m., her phone shattered the silence with an emergency alert that would change everything one more time. Grace grabbed her phone, heart hammering. The alert was from the hospital's emergency notification system. Mass casualty incident. All available staff report. Immediately, building collapse. Downtown Crescent Falls. She was dressed and out the door in 4 minutes. The drive to Mercy Ridge took half the usual time. Streets were empty at 3 a.m., except for emergency vehicles screaming past in the opposite direction. Grace's radio crackled with overlapping dispatch calls. A 6-story residential building had collapsed in the historic district. Preliminary reports estimated 200 people trapped in the rubble. The hospital parking lot was already chaos when she arrived. Ambulances lined up 3 deep at the emergency entrance. Medical staff were running between vehicles. Someone had set up triage stations under portable lights that cast harsh shadows across the pavement. Grace flashed her badge at security and ran inside. The emergency department was a controlled storm. Trauma teams assembling, supply carts being loaded, residents receiving rapid-fire instructions from attending physicians. She found the charge nurse, a woman named Thompson who'd been working at Mercy Ridge for 20 years. "Holloway, thank God, we need every experienced hand we can get." Thompson thrust a tablet at her. "You're on trauma 2. First wave of critical patients is 5 minutes out." Grace took the tablet and scanned the incoming patient list. Multiple crush injuries, suspected internal bleeding, traumatic amputations, the kind of injuries that required split-second decisions and steady hands. She scrubbed in and joined her team just as the first ambulance arrived. The next 4 hours were a blur of blood and adrenaline. Patient after patient, a woman with a compound leg fracture and collapsed lung, a teenager with severe head trauma, a man whose right arm had been crushed beyond saving. Grace moved between them with the focused calm that came from years of training, making assessments, starting IVs, calling for surgeons when injuries exceeded emergency department capability. Around 7 a.m., during a brief lull between ambulance arrivals, Grace stepped outside for air. The sun was rising over Crescent Falls, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene against the backdrop of tragedy happening blocks away. Colonel Reeves found her there. "What are you doing here?" Grace asked, surprised. "Marines respond to mass casualty events. We've got a team at the collapse site doing search and rescue." He looked exhausted, covered in dust. Torres is there too, insisted on helping despite medical leave. "Is he okay?" "Stubborn as hell and probably doing damage to his shoulder, but yeah." Reeves studied her. "How many have come through?" 43 so far, most stable, some critical. We've lost 2. Grace's voice stayed level despite the weight of those words. "How many are still trapped?" "Unknown. The building's unstable. Rescue teams can only work in short intervals." He paused. "There's something else you need to know. The building that collapsed? The owner is on Mercy Ridge's board of directors." Grace's exhausted brain took a moment to process that. "Which one?" "Lawrence Greer. He owns half the rental properties in the historic district. Building inspectors had flagged that structure for code violations 8 months ago. Greer fought the citations, claimed the inspectors were overreaching." Reeves's expression was grim. "He's also the board member who fought hardest against the ethics oversight reforms you pushed for." Grace felt ice slide down her spine. "Are you saying this collapse was preventable?" "I'm saying the city's going to be asking that question very loudly very soon. And when they do, Greer's connection to this hospital is going to become very relevant." Before Grace could respond, her pager went off. Another ambulance incoming, multiple critical patients. She ran back inside. By noon, the flood of patients had slowed to a trickle. The most critical had been stabilized or transferred to surgery. The walking wounded had been treated and discharged. Grace found herself in the break room with a cup of coffee she was too wired to drink, surrounded by equally exhausted colleagues. The TV in the corner was showing continuous coverage of the collapse. Aerial footage revealed a pile of rubble where a building had stood, twisted metal, shattered concrete, personal belongings scattered across the debris field. Search dogs picked through the wreckage while firefighters worked in coordinated teams to shore up unstable sections. Then the coverage cut to a press conference. The mayor of Crescent Falls stood at a podium, flanked by fire and police chiefs. "At this time, we can confirm 68 people have been rescued from the collapsed building. 17 remain unaccounted for. Search and rescue operations continue." The mayor's face was drawn. "We are also launching an immediate investigation into the structural integrity of the building and whether proper safety protocols were followed." A reporter shouted a question Grace couldn't hear. The mayor's jaw tightened. "I will say this. Preliminary evidence suggests this building had multiple outstanding code violations that were never properly addressed. If negligence contributed to this tragedy, those responsible will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law." The camera cut to footage of Lawrence Greer, a heavy-set man in his 60s with silver hair and expensive suit, being confronted by reporters outside his office building. Greer looked panicked, his usual boardroom confidence shattered. "No comment. I have no comment at this time. My lawyers will just no comment." He pushed through the crowd and disappeared into his building. Grace's phone buzzed. Margaret Sutton calling. "Grace, are you still at the hospital?" "Yes." "I need you in my office. Now, please." Sutton's voice was strained in a way Grace had never heard before. Grace found Sutton in the administrative wing, pacing her office like a caged animal. Two other board members were there, Director Chen and a man Grace recognized as the hospital's legal counsel. Sutton turned when Grace entered. "Thank you for coming. I know you've been working all night, but this can't wait." "What's happening?" "Lawrence Greer is happening." Sutton gestured at the lawyer. "Tell her." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Greer has been a board member for 12 years. During that time, he's consistently opposed safety reforms, ethics oversight, and increased operational transparency. We now have evidence suggesting his opposition was motivated by conflicts of interest." Grace sat down slowly. "What kind of conflicts?" "Greer owns the property management company that services several of Mercy Ridge's satellite facilities. He's been billing the hospital at significantly inflated rates while providing substandard maintenance. We discovered this during the financial audit triggered by the Crane investigation." The lawyer's expression was tight. "If that building collapsed due to deferred maintenance, and early indications suggest it did, Greer is looking at criminal negligence charges. Possibly manslaughter if any of the missing 17 are found dead." "What does this have to do with me?" Sutton stepped forward. "Greer was one of 2 board members who voted against your reinstatement. He also voted against the whistleblower protections and ethics reforms. We believe he did this because increased oversight would have revealed his financial improprieties." Grace processed this slowly. "So he tried to keep me silenced to protect his own corruption." "Yes." Sutton's voice was hard. "And now people are dead because buildings he was responsible for weren't properly maintained, buildings that should have been condemned months ago." Grace thought about the patients she'd treated that morning. The woman with the crushed leg. The teenager with head trauma. The man who'd lost his arm. All of them victims of negligence that could have been prevented. "What do you need from me?" she asked quietly. "Your testimony. When this goes to trial, and it will, prosecutors are going to establish a pattern of Greer prioritizing profit over safety. Your case is part of that pattern. He tried to silence someone who threatened his control, just like he silenced building inspectors who threatened his revenue." Sutton met her eyes. "Will you testify?" Grace didn't hesitate. "Yes." The lawyer nodded. "Federal prosecutors will contact you within 48 hours. This is going to be a major case. Criminal charges, civil lawsuits, probably state and federal investigations. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? I carried a man up 200 stairs while administrators tried to stop me. I testified about it in front of national media. I think I can handle answering questions in a courtroom." A ghost of a smile crossed the lawyer's face. "Fair point." Sutton walked Grace to the door. "Thank you. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you became a nurse." "No," Grace agreed, "but it's what needs to happen." She returned to the emergency department and worked the rest of her shift in a fog of exhaustion and anger. Anger at Greer for prioritizing money over lives. Anger at the system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for 12 years. Anger at how many people had probably tried to raise concerns and been silenced. At 4 p.m., her replacement arrived. Grace logged out, gathered her things, and was heading for the parking lot when someone called her name. She turned. Miguel Torres, still in dusty clothes from the rescue site, his right arm in a fresh sling. "You shouldn't be here," Grace said. "You're supposed to be recovering." "Couldn't sit on base while people were trapped." Torres's face was haggard. "We pulled out 4 people alive today, found 3 dead." His voice cracked slightly. One of them was a kid, maybe 7 years old. Grace felt something break inside her chest. She'd seen the child's name on the casualty list. Female, age 6, DOA. She'd been hoping it was a mistake. "I'm sorry," she said inadequately. Torres shook his head. "The building inspector who flagged that structure for violations? She came to the site this afternoon, started crying when she saw the rubble. Said she'd tried to get it condemned, but the owner fought her at every turn, tied her up in legal challenges until she ran out of time and budget to pursue it." "Greer?" "Yeah." Torres' jaw set. "Colonel told me you're testifying against him. Good. Someone needs to make him pay for this." Grace looked past Torres at the hospital entrance. Patients were still arriving, still being treated, still being saved or lost based on decisions made in split seconds. But some decisions, the ones made months or years ago, the ones about building maintenance and safety protocols, and who to silence when they raised concerns, those decisions had consequences that rippled forward in time until they became tragedy. "He's going to pay," Grace said. "I'll make sure of it." That night, Grace went home and slept for 12 hours straight. When she woke, it was Thursday morning, and the news was everywhere. Lawrence Greer had been arrested. Criminal negligence, multiple counts. Wire fraud for the inflated billing scheme. Bribery for payments made to city officials to delay building inspections. The charges kept mounting as investigators dug deeper into his business practices. The death toll from the collapse had risen to 4. 13 people still unaccounted for, though hope of finding them alive was fading. And Grace's name was back in the headlines, this time connected to a much larger story about corruption, negligence, and the price of silencing whistleblowers. Her phone rang constantly. Grace ignored most calls, but when Patricia Wells called, she answered. "Are you seeing this?" Patricia asked without preamble. "They're connecting everything. Greer's corruption, Crane's retaliation policies, the building collapse. It's all tied together." "I know." "Grace, this is bigger than we thought. It wasn't just Crane being power-hungry. It was systematic. Greer needed people like Crane to keep whistleblowers quiet so his schemes wouldn't be exposed." Patricia's voice shook. How many other people tried to raise flags that got buried? Grace had been wondering the same thing. Probably more than we'll ever know. "The other nurses and I, we've been talking. We want to create a foundation for healthcare whistleblowers, legal support, financial assistance, mental health resources. We want to make sure what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else." Patricia paused. "We want you to help lead it." Grace closed her eyes. She'd just started to find equilibrium again. The idea of taking on something this large felt overwhelming. But she thought about that 6-year-old child pulled from the rubble, about the building inspector who'd tried to do her job and been stonewalled, about every person who'd ever seen something wrong and been too afraid to speak up because they knew what happened to those who did. "Okay," Grace said, "let's do it." Friday morning, federal prosecutors contacted Grace as promised. She spent 4 hours giving a detailed statement about everything that had happened: Crane's threats, the elevator lockdown, the suspension, the retaliation. They recorded every word, asked her to sign every page. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Amanda Reyes, late 40s with sharp eyes and sharper questions. "Your case establishes pattern and intent," Reyes explained. "Greer can't claim ignorance when we can prove he actively worked to suppress oversight that would have exposed his fraud. You represent everyone he tried to silence." "What about Crane?" "She's cooperating with our investigation in exchange for reduced charges on the federal obstruction case. She's providing documentation of every instance where Greer pressured her to suppress safety complaints or fire employees who raised concerns." Reyes's expression was grim. "There are dozens of cases. Yours was just the most visible." Grace felt sick. How did this go on for so long? The same way it always does. People in power protecting each other, institutions prioritizing reputation over accountability, and individuals being afraid to stand up because they've seen what happens to those who do. Reyes met her eyes. "Until someone like you comes along and stands up anyway." Saturday brought news that the final missing victims from the collapse had been found. The death toll stood at 9. 9 people dead because a building owner had prioritized profit over safety, because city officials had been bribed, because whistleblowers had been silenced. Grace attended a memorial vigil that evening in the plaza near the collapse site. Hundreds of people gathered, holding candles, sharing memories of those lost. The mayor spoke. The fire chief spoke. Several survivors gave brief statements about the neighbors who'd helped them escape. Then someone Grace didn't recognize called her name from the crowd. "Grace Holloway, will you say something?" Grace shook her head, stepping back. She wasn't part of this tragedy. She'd just treated the wounded. But the crowd took up the call, voices asking her to speak, to say something, to help them make sense of senseless loss. Grace looked at the 9 photographs displayed at the memorial. 9 faces: the 6-year-old girl, a young mother, an elderly man, a college student, people who'd woken up Tuesday morning expecting ordinary days and instead found oblivion. She stepped forward to the microphone someone had set up. "I didn't know any of the people we lost," Grace said quietly. The crowd fell silent, listening. "But I know they died because someone chose profit over safety, because warnings were ignored, because the people who tried to raise alarms were silenced." She paused, gathering her thoughts. 3 weeks ago, I was told to walk away from a wounded man because helping him might create liability for my employer. I didn't walk away, and when I refused, I was punished for it. Grace's voice strengthened. But that punishment exposed something larger, a system designed to silence anyone who challenged authority. The same system that allowed a building owner to ignore safety violations. The same system that got 9 people killed. The crowd was completely still now. "I can't bring back the people we lost tonight. No one can. But I can promise you this. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure the systems that failed them never fail anyone else. I'm going to testify. I'm going to fight. I'm going to make noise until the people responsible are held accountable and the structures that enabled them are torn down." Grace's hands were shaking. She gripped the microphone stand harder. "We can't save the 9 people we're mourning, but we can save the next 9, and the 9 after that. We can demand better. We can refuse to be silent. We can carry each other up whatever stairs we have to climb." She stepped back from the microphone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire plaza was applauding, not celebratory, but fierce, determined. The sound of people who'd been beaten down and were choosing to stand back up. Grace left the vigil feeling hollowed out, but somehow stronger, like she'd been refined in fire and emerged as something harder, more resilient. Sunday, she met with Patricia Wells and the 6 other nurses to begin planning the Whistleblower Foundation. They gathered in Patricia's living room, laptops open, legal pads covered in notes, determined to build something lasting from the ashes of their collective trauma. "We need funding," Sandra Chen said. "Legal support is expensive." "I might be able to help with that." The voice came from Grace's phone, which was on speaker. Colonel Reeves had joined the meeting remotely. "The Marine Corps has a veteran advocacy networks that support similar initiatives. I can make introductions. We'll also need medical professionals willing to serve as advisors," Rebecca Martinez added. "People who understand the unique pressures healthcare workers face." "And we need a name," Patricia said. "Something that captures what we're trying to do." They debated for 20 minutes. Finally, Grace spoke up. "The Stairwell Foundation." Everyone looked at her. "Because sometimes the elevators don't work," Grace explained. "Sometimes the systems fail and you have to climb anyway. That's what we're here to help people do, make the climb when institutions try to stop them." Patricia smiled. "I like it. The Stairwell Foundation, for people who refuse to stay down." They voted unanimously. Monday morning, Grace returned to Mercy Ridge for her first full week back at work. The hospital felt different now. More eyes on her, more people stopping to thank her or ask how she was doing. The invisible nurse wasn't invisible anymore, but the work was the same. Patients needed care. Medications needed administering. Families needed reassurance. Grace fell into the rhythm gratefully, finding comfort in the ordinary tasks that had nothing to do with federal investigations or national news coverage. At lunch, Director Chen found her in the break room. "The board met this morning. Lawrence Greer has been removed, effective immediately. We're also conducting a full audit of all vendor contracts and property management agreements." Chen sat across from Grace. "Your advocacy role is being expanded. The board wants you to oversee the entire ethics oversight process." Grace set down her sandwich. "That's a full-time position." "Yes, which means you'd need to step back from direct patient care." Chen's expression was carefully neutral. "The board is prepared to offer you a significant salary increase and a department budget. You'd be building something entirely new, a patient and employee advocacy infrastructure that could become a model for hospitals nationwide." Grace stared at her coffee cup. She'd become a nurse to help people. Direct, hands-on help. The idea of leaving bedside care felt like abandonment. But she thought about the Stairwell Foundation, about Greer facing criminal charges, about Crane cooperating with prosecutors, about 9 people dead because the systems designed to protect them had failed. "Can I think about it?" "Take a week." "But Grace, you've already changed this hospital more than you realize. Imagine what you could do with formal authority and resources to back you up. That afternoon, between patients, Grace called Colonel Reeves. They want to make me an administrator, full-time ethics oversight. What do you want? Grace was quiet for a long moment. I want to make sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. Then you already know your answer. But I'd be leaving patient care. That's what I trained for. That's who I am. No, Reeves said firmly. Who you are is someone who climbs stairs when elevators fail. Someone who carries weight others won't. That doesn't change whether you're holding a patient's hand or reforming hospital policy. You're still helping people, just at a different scale. After they hung up, Grace finished her shift in thoughtful silence. At 5 p.m., she found Director Chen before leaving. I'll take the position, but I have conditions. Chen pulled out a notepad. Go ahead. The ethics department reports directly to the board, not through hospital administration. Complete independence. Second, any employee can file a complaint without fear of retaliation, and all complaints trigger mandatory review. Third, quarterly public reports on complaint volume, investigation outcomes, and corrective actions taken. The board won't like that level of transparency. The board just lost a member to criminal negligence charges. I think they'll learn to appreciate transparency. Grace's voice was steady. Those are my terms, non-negotiable. Chen studied her for a moment, then smiled. I'll present them tomorrow. But between us, I think they'll agree to anything you ask at this point. That evening, Grace sat in her apartment with her laptop open to news coverage of Lawrence Greer's arraignment. He'd pleaded not guilty to all charges. His lawyers were already spinning narratives about overzealous prosecutors and coincidental timing. But Grace had seen the evidence prosecutors were building. Greer's corruption went back years: bribed inspectors, falsified reports, systematic suppression of safety complaints. The case was ironclad. Her phone buzzed. Amanda Reyes, the federal prosecutor. We've set a trial date, 6 months from now. I'll need you to testify about the retaliation you faced and how it connects to Greer's pattern of silencing oversight. I'll be there. There's something else. Crane has agreed to testify against Greer in exchange for a plea deal on the obstruction charges. She's providing documentation of at least 40 instances where Greer directed her to suppress complaints or terminate employees who raised safety concerns. Grace felt a cold satisfaction. How much time is she facing? With the plea? Probably 2 years suspended sentence, probation. The federal charges would have put her away for 5 to 7. That's not enough. No, Reyes agreed. But her testimony will help put Greer away for 20 to life. Sometimes you have to accept small justice to achieve larger justice. After hanging up, Grace thought about Judith Crane, the woman who'd threatened to destroy her career, who'd locked down elevators while a man bled out, who'd systematically silenced dozens of healthcare workers trying to do the right thing. 2 years felt inadequate, but Crane's career was destroyed, her reputation shattered, and she'd spend the rest of her life known as the administrator who enabled corruption that killed 9 people. Maybe that was its own kind of justice. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Mercy Ridge. Grace was reviewing patient charts when security called, someone asking for her at the main entrance. She went down and found the building inspector who'd tried to condemn Greer's properties. The woman was in her mid-40s, thin and exhausted looking. Ms. Holloway, I'm Jessica Moreno. I don't know if you remember, but I was mentioned in the news coverage. I filed the initial violations against the building that collapsed. I remember. I'm sorry for what you went through. Moreno's eyes filled with tears. I tried so hard to get that building condemned, but Greer had lawyers and connections, and I couldn't make anyone listen. Grace guided her to a quiet seating area away from the main traffic flow. It's not your fault. I know that in my head, but those 9 people are still dead. Moreno wiped her eyes. I came here because I heard about what you're doing. The Stairwell Foundation. I want to help. I want to make sure other inspectors don't face what I faced when they try to do their jobs. Grace sat with her as Moreno explained how Greer had systematically blocked inspections, filed frivolous lawsuits, and pressured city officials to transfer her to different districts every time she got close to shutting down one of his properties. He had a whole network, Moreno said. Property owners, city council members, even some police who'd look the other way when tenants complained. I was one person fighting an entire system. Not anymore, Grace said quietly. Now you've got all of us. They exchanged contact information. Moreno left looking lighter somehow, like sharing the burden had reduced its weight. That afternoon, Grace received formal confirmation. The board had approved all her conditions for the ethics oversight position. She'd start the new role in 2 weeks, giving her time to transition her current patients and train a replacement. Wednesday, Grace met with the other Stairwell Foundation members to announce they'd secured their first major donation, $100,000 from a veterans advocacy group that Colonel Reeves had connected them with. It was enough to hire a part-time lawyer and begin accepting cases. "We should announce this publicly," Patricia said. "Let people know we're operational." They scheduled a press conference for Friday. Grace spent Thursday preparing her statement, trying to find words that would convey the foundation's purpose without sounding like she was seeking attention or credit. Friday morning arrived clear and cold. The press conference was held at a community center in downtown Crescent Falls, away from the hospital to avoid any appearance of institutional endorsement. 50 people attended: reporters, former hospital employees, advocates, and curious citizens. Grace stood at the podium with Patricia and the other 6 nurses flanking her. "3 weeks ago, I made a choice that changed my life," Grace began. "I chose to help someone who needed help, and I was punished for it. That punishment exposed a larger problem: systems designed to silence people who challenge authority, even when that authority is wrong." She outlined the foundation's purpose: legal support for whistleblowers, mental health resources, financial assistance for those facing retaliation, public advocacy for policy reform. We can't undo the past. We can't bring back the people lost in the building collapse or restore the careers destroyed by corrupt administrators. But we can make sure the next person who sees something wrong has support when they speak up. We can make sure the next building inspector isn't fighting alone. We can make sure the next nurse doesn't have to choose between her conscience and her career. Questions erupted. Grace answered them calmly, deflecting personal attention back to the foundation's mission, to the nurses standing with her, to the larger systemic issues they were addressing. At the end, a young reporter asked the question Grace had been dreading: "Do you consider yourself a hero?" Grace thought about Torres on that pavement, about climbing those stairs, about the weight of his body and the sound of Judith Crane's threats echoing up the stairwell. "No," she said simply. "I'm just a nurse who did what nurses do. I helped someone who needed help. What makes me different is that I survived the punishment that usually silences people, and I'm using that survival to make sure others don't have to fight alone." That's not heroism. That's just refusal to quit. The press conference ended. Grace and the other nurses fielded individual questions for another hour before finally escaping to a nearby coffee shop where they could decompress. "That went well," Rebecca said, looking relieved. "We sounded professional, serious." "We are serious," Grace replied. "This is just the beginning." Her phone buzzed. Amanda Reyes again. "Greer's lawyers are trying to get the case dismissed. They're arguing prosecutorial overreach, claiming the building collapse was an unforeseeable accident and the corruption charges are unrelated." Reyes sounded frustrated. "It won't work, but it might delay the trial." "What do you need from me?" "Just stay ready, and if you have any evidence we haven't seen yet, anything at all that shows Greer's pattern of suppressing safety concerns, now's the time to share it." Grace thought for a moment. "I might have something. Give me 24 hours. She called Margaret Sutton. "I need access to old hospital records, employment files, termination documentation, complaint logs, everything from the last 12 years. That's a lot of data. What are you looking for?" "Patterns. Greer was on the board for 12 years. If he was systematically suppressing oversight, there should be evidence in how many safety complaints were filed versus how many were actually investigated, how many employees were terminated after raising concerns, whether there's correlation between complaint volume and budget allocations." Sutton was quiet. "That could be damning for the hospital." "The hospital is already damned, but this could help put Greer away permanently and prove why we need the reforms we're implementing." Grace paused. "Unless you'd rather protect the institution's reputation than pursue justice." "No." Sutton's voice hardened. "No, you're right. I'll have the records pulled. You can access them Monday morning." Grace spent the weekend mentally preparing for what she might find. Sunday evening, Miguel Torres called. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know I'm testifying at Greer's trial too about how the hospital tried to cover up what happened to me, how they initially characterized it as gang violence, even though they knew it wasn't." "Are you sure? That's going to bring up a lot of difficult memories." "I'm sure. You carried me up those stairs when you didn't have to. Least I can do is carry my part of making sure Greer answers for what he did." Monday morning, Grace arrived at the hospital at 6 a.m. Sutton had arranged for her to use a conference room with boxes of records stacked floor to ceiling, 12 years of employment files, complaint logs, budget reports, and board meeting minutes. Grace dove in systematically, creating spreadsheets to track patterns. By noon, the picture was clear and horrifying. In the 12 years Greer had served on the board, safety complaint volume had increased by 40%, but investigation completion rates had decreased by 60%. 67 employees had been terminated for what records called performance issues or cultural misalignment. Of those 67, 49 had filed formal complaints in the 6 months before their termination. The correlation was undeniable. File a complaint, lose your job. But the most damning evidence was in the board meeting minutes. Grace found repeated instances where Greer had argued against increased safety oversight, against transparency measures, against whistleblower protections. Every single reform that might have exposed his corruption, he'd opposed. Grace compiled everything into a comprehensive report and sent it to Amanda Reyes before the end of the day. Reyes called within an hour. "This is exactly what we needed. It establishes clear motive. Greer wasn't just corrupt. He actively worked to dismantle the systems that could have caught him. Combined with Crane's testimony and the building inspector's documentation, this case is bulletproof." "When's the trial?" "We're pushing for an expedited schedule given the public interest. Probably 4 months now instead of 6. 4 months. Grace could handle 4 more months of scrutiny, of being the public face of whistleblower advocacy, of testifying about the worst night of her life. 4 months. And then maybe she could finally move forward into whatever came next. That evening, Grace sat in her apartment and allowed herself, for the first time since this began, to imagine a future beyond the fight. A future where the Stairwell Foundation was established and helping people. Where Mercy Ridge Hospital had functioning ethics oversight that prevented another Judith Crane from taking power. Where building inspectors like Jessica Moreno could do their jobs without fear of retaliation. A future where people like Lawrence Greer faced consequences for prioritizing profit over human life. Her phone rang one final time. An unknown number. Grace almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Is this Grace Holloway?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. "Yes? Who's this?" "My name is David Brennan. I'm Lawrence Greer's son-in-law." Grace went very still. "What do you want?" "I need to talk to you, in person. It's about my father-in-law's case." He paused. "I have information the prosecutors don't know yet. Information that could change everything." Grace's fingers tightened on her phone. "Why would you help me, your family?" "Because I have a daughter." David Brennan's voice was strained. "She's 3 years old, and she almost lived in that building. My wife and I looked at an apartment there 6 months ago. We didn't take it because the rent was too high." He took a shaky breath. "But if we'd chosen differently, my little girl could be one of those 9 people." Grace felt her pulse hammering. "What information do you have?" "I can't discuss this over the phone. Can we meet? Tomorrow morning. Somewhere public." Grace's instincts screamed caution. This could be a trap, a way for Greer's lawyers to gather information about the prosecution's case. But something in Brennan's voice, the raw fear and guilt, sounded genuine. "There's a coffee shop on Market Street. 7th and Market. 9 a.m. I'll be there. And Ms. Holloway, thank you for what you're doing. Someone needs to stop him before anyone else gets hurt." After hanging up, Grace immediately called Amanda Reyes and relayed the conversation. "Don't go alone," Reyes said sharply. "If this is legitimate, we need to document it properly. If it's a setup, you need protection. I'm sending an agent to accompany you." The next morning, Grace arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early. A woman in casual clothes approached her immediately. FBI Special Agent Lisa Park, who flashed credentials and ordered coffee before settling into a booth with sightlines to the entrance. "If this goes sideways, I'm pulling you out immediately, Park said quietly. Greer's desperate. Desperate people do stupid things. David Brennan arrived exactly at 9. He was younger than Grace expected. Mid-30s, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down, dark circles under his eyes. He spotted Grace and walked over hesitantly. Ms. Holloway? Grace nodded. This is Special Agent Park. Whatever you tell me, you're telling federal investigators. Brennan blanched, but sat down. I expected that. I'm not trying to hide anything. He pulled a tablet from his bag. I work in accounting, not for Greer, I made sure of that. But my wife is his daughter, so I've been to family dinners, holiday gatherings. I've heard things. He opened the tablet to show a folder of scanned documents. 3 months ago, Lawrence got drunk at Thanksgiving, started bragging about how he'd handled a problem with some building inspector who was making trouble. Said he had friends at the city who made sure she got reassigned before she could cause real damage. Agent Park leaned forward. Jessica Moreno. I didn't know her name then, but yes. Brennan scrolled to another document. I started paying attention after that. Started taking photos of papers he left lying around when we visited. Financial records showing payments to city officials labeled as consulting fees. Emails discussing how to delay inspections. Grace stared at the screen. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Brennan's face crumpled. Because he's family. Because my wife kept saying he was just a tough businessman, that everyone bends rules. Because I told myself it wasn't my problem. His voice broke. And then that building collapsed. And I realized my silence almost killed my daughter. Agent Park was already on her phone, calling someone. She stepped away from the booth, speaking rapidly in low tones. Grace looked at Brennan. Your wife, does she know you're here? No, she'd try to stop me. She still thinks her father is a good man who made mistakes. Brennan met Grace's eyes. I can't believe that anymore. Not when I look at my daughter and think about the 6-year-old who died in that rubble. Park returned. I need you to come to the federal building right now. We're going to take a full statement and secure these documents. This is enough to add bribery and racketeering charges to Greer's indictment. Brennan nodded, looking relieved and terrified at once. What happens to me? You cooperate fully, you'll probably be fine. You weren't part of the criminal enterprise, you're just providing evidence. Park's expression softened slightly. You're doing the right thing. As they left the coffee shop, Brennan turned to Grace. I saw your interview, the one where you talked about refusing to be silent. That's what gave me the courage to come forward. He swallowed hard. So thank you for showing people like me that speaking up is possible. Grace watched him leave with Agent Park, then sat alone with her coffee as the morning crowd filtered in and out. Her phone buzzed with a text from Reyes. This changes everything. Greer's facing RICO charges now. Could be looking at life without parole. The trial moved up to 8 weeks away. Prosecutors needed time to integrate the new evidence and secure additional testimony from the city officials Greer had bribed. Grace spent those weeks splitting her time between her new role overseeing ethics at Mercy Ridge and building the Stairwell Foundation's infrastructure with the other nurses. The foundation's launch was bigger than they'd anticipated. Within a month, they'd received over 300 inquiries from healthcare workers, building inspectors, teachers, social workers, anyone who'd faced retaliation for reporting safety concerns. They couldn't help everyone, not yet, but they triaged cases and provided at least basic guidance to all who reached out. Grace found herself speaking at conferences, testifying before state legislative committees about whistleblower protection laws, consulting with hospitals across the country about ethics oversight. The invisible nurse had become a very visible advocate, but she still made time for what mattered most. She visited Miguel Torres when he returned to Crescent Falls for physical therapy. She met regularly with Jessica Moreno to coordinate advocacy between healthcare and building safety sectors. She kept in touch with the families of the 9 people killed in the collapse, listening to their stories, remembering their names. The trial began on a cold Monday in March. The federal courthouse in downtown Crescent Falls was packed. Media, victims' families, curious citizens, and a small contingent of Marines in dress blues who'd come to support both Torres and Grace. Grace was scheduled to testify on day 3. She spent the first 2 days observing from the gallery, watching prosecutors methodically build their case. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, emails, testimony from city officials who'd flipped in exchange for reduced sentences, and devastating testimony from Judith Crane. Crane looked diminished on the witness stand. The powerful administrator who'd once threatened to destroy careers now spoke in a flat monotone, answering questions about how Greer had directed her to suppress safety complaints, terminate troublesome employees, and mischaracterize incidents to avoid regulatory scrutiny. Did Mr. Greer specifically instruct you to prevent Grace Holloway from helping Corporal Torres? The prosecutor asked. Crane's hands twisted in her lap. Not specifically by name, but he'd made it clear that any incident requiring emergency response should be contained first, treatment second. He was obsessed with liability exposure. And when Ms. Holloway defied your orders? I threatened her with termination because that's what I'd been trained to do. Suppress problems. Eliminate people who created complications. Crane's voice was barely audible. I thought I was protecting the hospital. I didn't realize I was protecting corruption. During cross-examination, Greer's lawyers tried to paint Crane as a rogue administrator acting without oversight. But the emails destroyed that narrative. Dozens of messages showing Greer directing her actions, praising her for handling difficult personnel situations, and ensuring she received bonuses for keeping complaint numbers low. On day 3, Grace took the stand. She'd prepared for weeks reviewing her statement with prosecutors until she could deliver it without emotional breakdown. But sitting in that witness box, under oath, with Greer's cold eyes fixed on her from the defense table, preparation only went so far. The prosecutor started gently, walking her through the night of the shooting. Grace described finding Torres, Judith Crane's threats, the decision to carry him up the stairs despite being ordered not to. Why did you defy a direct order from your supervisor? The prosecutor asked. Because the order was wrong. Because a man was dying and the systems that should have saved him had failed. Because I took an oath to do no harm, and walking away would have been the greatest harm I could inflict. The prosecutor showed security footage on courtroom monitors, Grace in the stairwell, Torres on her back, climbing step by step while Crane's voice echoed from below, threatening her job. Several jurors looked visibly moved. Then came the connection to Greer. The prosecutor presented evidence showing Greer had repeatedly opposed transparency measures that would have revealed how many employees were terminated after filing safety complaints, showed emails where he'd instructed administrators to control the narrative around incidents, showed financial records proving he'd profited from the very lack of oversight he'd fought to maintain. Holloway, in your professional opinion, if proper oversight mechanisms had been in place at Mercy Ridge Hospital, would Judith Crane have been able to operate the way she did? Grace looked directly at Greer. No, she had power because people like Mr. Greer made sure there were no checks on that power. He needed administrators who would suppress problems because his entire business model depended on avoiding scrutiny. During cross-examination, Greer's lawyer tried to paint Grace as glory-seeking, someone who deliberately defied orders to create a dramatic story. Isn't it true, Ms. Holloway, that you knew the media would be interested in a story about a nurse carrying a wounded Marine? Grace kept her voice steady. When I picked up Corporal Torres, I wasn't thinking about media coverage. I was thinking about keeping him alive for the next 60 seconds, then the 60 seconds after that. I didn't plan to become a public figure. I just planned to do my job. But you've certainly capitalized on the attention, haven't you? Speaking engagements, foundation leadership, book deals. I haven't accepted any book deals. The Stairwell Foundation is nonprofit and I take no salary from it. And I speak publicly because people need to know that retaliation against whistleblowers isn't just wrong. It's dangerous. It gets people killed. Grace's voice hardened. 9 people died because your client systematically dismantled the oversight that would have condemned his unsafe buildings. I'm not capitalizing on anything. I'm trying to prevent more deaths. The lawyer switched tactics. You're not an expert in building safety or property management, are you? No. But I'm an expert in what happens when people prioritize profit over safety. I've seen the results in trauma bays and operating rooms. I've held the hands of people dying from preventable injuries. That's my expertise. After Grace's testimony, the prosecution called Miguel Torres. He walked to the stand in his dress blues, right arm still showing limited mobility from the gunshot wound. His testimony was brief but devastating. I was told I almost died because a building owner wanted to avoid liability lawsuits. That a nurse who saved my life was punished because the same systems that let unsafe buildings stand also let administrators silence anyone who challenged them. Torres looked at Greer. I served 3 tours defending this country. I never thought I'd nearly die on American soil because someone valued money more than human life. The defense tried to object, claiming Torres's testimony was prejudicial. The judge overruled them. Jessica Moreno testified next, describing how Greer had systematically obstructed her building inspections through legal challenges and political pressure. She presented a timeline showing that every time she'd gotten close to shutting down one of his properties, she'd been suddenly reassigned to a different district. Did you ever meet Mr. Greer personally? The prosecutor asked. Once, at a city council meeting where I was advocating for increased inspection authority. He approached me afterward and said, Moreno's voice shook. He said that if I kept making trouble, I'd find myself unemployed, that he had friends who could make my life difficult. Did you report this threat? To my supervisor, who told me to drop it. Later I learned that supervisor had received campaign contributions from Greer. Moreno wiped her eyes. I tried to do my job, but he made it impossible. The families of the 9 victims testified throughout the second week. A mother who'd lost her 6-year-old daughter, a husband who'd lost his wife, an elderly woman who'd lost her grandson. Each one described the person they'd lost, the life stolen by negligence, the grief that would never fully heal. Their testimony broke something in the courtroom. Jurors cried openly. The judge had to call several recesses. Even Greer's lawyers looked shaken. But Greer himself remained impassive throughout, his expression cold and calculating. The prosecution's final witness was David Brennan. He testified about the documents he'd provided, the conversations he'd overheard, the evidence of systematic bribery and corruption. When asked why he'd come forward, he looked at the victims' families. Because staying silent would make me complicit. Because my daughter is alive by pure chance, and these families deserve the same chance I got. His voice broke. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. I'm sorry it took 9 deaths to give me courage. The defense's case was weak. They tried to argue that building collapses were complex events with multiple contributing factors. That Greer was a businessman, not a structural engineer, and couldn't be held responsible for technical failures. That the connections between his opposition to oversight and the specific safety failures were circumstantial. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was swift and unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Criminal negligence, bribery, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and 9 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Greer's face went white. His lawyers immediately began filing motions for appeal, but the judge denied bond pending sentencing. Lawrence Greer was remanded to custody immediately. As marshals led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at Grace one final time, not with hatred or defiance, with something worse, comprehension. The understanding that he'd lost because he'd underestimated the resolve of people he'd considered beneath his notice. Grace met his eyes and didn't look away. This was justice. Not perfect, not complete, but real. Outside the courthouse, victims' families gathered with prosecutors and advocates. Grace stood with Patricia Wells and the other Stairwell Foundation nurses, with Jessica Moreno and Miguel Torres and Colonel Reeves. The Marines who'd attended the trial formed an honor guard around them, keeping media at a respectful distance. A reporter managed to get close enough to shout a question. Miss Holloway, how do you feel about the verdict? Grace thought about Torres on that pavement, about climbing those stairs, about 9 people who'd never climb anything again. I feel like the system worked the way it's supposed to, slowly, imperfectly, but ultimately toward justice. I feel grateful to everyone who had the courage to testify, to come forward, to refuse to stay silent. She paused. But mostly, I feel determined to make sure we never need another trial like this, that we fix the broken systems before more people die. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Lawrence Greer received 25 years to life with no possibility of parole for 15 years. He'd be in his mid-80s before he could even apply for release. Judith Crane received 2 years suspended sentence and 5 years probation. She was permanently barred from working in healthcare administration. The last Grace heard, Crane was working retail in a different state, trying to rebuild a life from ashes. The city officials who'd accepted bribes received varying sentences, some prison time, some probation, all permanently barred from public service. Jessica Moreno was promoted to chief building inspector with expanded authority and budget. Mercy Ridge Hospital completed its restructuring. The new ethics oversight department had full independence, mandatory investigation protocols, and quarterly public reporting. Not a single complaint had been suppressed in the 6 months since Grace took over the department. The Stairwell Foundation expanded beyond anything Grace had imagined. They secured additional funding from donors moved by the trial coverage, opened satellite offices in 3 other states, helped over 200 whistleblowers navigate retaliation, legal challenges, and career rebuilding. Patricia Wells became the foundation's executive director. Sandra Chen led the legal team. Rebecca Martinez oversaw mental health support services. The 7 nurses who'd once been silenced and discarded now ran an organization that ensured others wouldn't suffer the same fate. Grace split her time between the ethics oversight role at Mercy Ridge and foundation advocacy work. She testified before Congress about whistleblower protection legislation, consulted with the CDC on healthcare reporting systems, spoke at medical schools about ethical courage. But she also made sure to stay connected to the work that had started everything. Once a month, she picked up a shift in the Mercy Ridge Emergency Department, direct patient care, the hands-on work that reminded her why any of this mattered. 6 months after the trial, Grace received an invitation to speak at the Marine Corps base where Torres was stationed. The occasion was a ceremony honoring military medical personnel and civilian first responders. She almost declined. The attention still felt uncomfortable, undeserved, but Torres called personally. "Ma'am, you carried me when I couldn't walk. Let us carry you for a change, just for one day." The ceremony was held on a crisp autumn morning. Hundreds of Marines in formation, flags snapping in the wind, the precision and pride of military ritual. Grace stood on the platform feeling out of place in civilian clothes among uniforms and medals. But when the commanding general called her forward and presented her with the Department of Defense Medal for Valor, the highest civilian honor the military could bestow, Grace understood. This wasn't about her. It was about what she represented. The refusal to abandon someone in need. The choice to climb when elevators failed. Torres was there, fully recovered now, standing at attention as Grace accepted the medal. When the general stepped back, Torres saluted. Not the formal military salute this time, but something more personal. Gratitude rendered through gesture. Grace returned to Crescent Falls that evening and went straight to the Memorial Plaza where the 9 victims were remembered. Someone had planted a garden there. 9 trees, one for each life lost, with benches and a fountain and plaques bearing their names. Grace sat on a bench as sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. She thought about everything that had happened in the past 9 months. The shooting, the stairs, the suspension, the Marines standing vigil, the trial, the verdict, the slow, grinding work of institutional change. She thought about who she'd been before that night, invisible, quiet, keeping her head down, and who she was now, visible, vocal, unable to stay silent when she saw injustice. The change had been forced on her. She hadn't chosen to become a public figure or foundation leader or whistleblower advocate. She'd just chosen to help someone who needed help, and everything else had followed. But she'd made choices along the way. To testify instead of taking the settlement, to push for systemic change instead of just personal vindication, to use visibility not for personal gain but to protect others. Those had been her choices, and she'd make them again. Grace's phone buzzed, a text from Director Chen. "Board meeting tomorrow. They want to discuss expanding the ethics program to all our affiliated hospitals. Your model is working." Another text from Patricia. "Just got confirmation. Stairwell Foundation is going national. We're opening offices in 10 new states." Another from Amanda Reyes. "Greer's appeal was denied. Sentence stands. It's really over." Grace read the messages and felt something settle in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like completion. The fight she'd never wanted was finished. The systems that had failed were being reformed. The people who'd been hurt had seen justice. And the work, the real work of prevention, of building better systems, of supporting people who chose courage over convenience, that work was just beginning. She stood and walked through the memorial garden one final time, reading each name on each plaque, promising them silently that their deaths had meant something, that changes had been made, that it would be harder for the next Lawrence Greer to prioritize profit over human life. Then Grace walked back to her car and drove home through the city she'd lived in for years, but only now truly felt part of. She'd been invisible here once. Now she was woven into its fabric, not as a hero, despite what others called her, but as someone who'd refused to look away when systems failed. That night, Grace pulled out the flag case the Marines had given her months ago. She hung it on her living room wall where she'd see it every morning, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. When others hesitated, you acted. The plaque's words had been true then. They remained true now, and they'd be true tomorrow when she woke up and went back to work reforming systems, supporting whistleblowers, and ensuring that the next person who saw something wrong would have the support to speak up. Grace Holloway had climbed 216 stairs with a wounded man on her back while administrators threatened her career. That climb had revealed corruption, destroyed the powerful, and built new systems from the rubble of broken ones. But the real climb, the one that mattered most, was the one she made every day. The choice to keep pushing for better, to refuse to accept broken systems as permanent, to carry the weight of others when they couldn't carry themselves. She'd been told she was done, finished, that her career was over. Instead, she'd started a movement. And somewhere in Crescent Falls, in cities across the country, in hospitals and inspection offices and schools, and anywhere people faced retaliation for doing the right thing, others were finding the courage to climb their own stairs. Because Grace Holloway had shown them it was possible. Because one person refusing to stay silent could change everything. Because the elevators would always fail sometimes. And when they did, someone had to be willing to take the stairs. Grace turned off the lights in her apartment and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new stairs to climb. She was ready. She'd always been ready. She just hadn't known it until the moment she'd looked at Miguel Torres bleeding on that pavement and made the only choice her conscience would allow. The choice that had changed everything. The choice that proved the most powerful force in the world isn't authority or money or institutional power. It's one person who refuses to walk away. And Grace Holloway would never walk away again.